The morning sun peeked through the blinds of a modest house on Oak Street. Thomas, a 45-year-old veteran who had lost his sight during his third tour overseas, felt the warmth on his face as he reached down to pat the fur of his loyal companion, Rex. The German shepherd nudged Thomas's hand gently, his way of saying good morning. "Ready for breakfast, buddy?" Thomas asked, his voice warm with affection. Thomas moved confidently through his home, his fingers brushing familiar landmarks as he went. He'd been blind for 7 years now, but the layout of his small house was as clear in his mind as any sight he'd ever seen. Rex padded quietly beside him, occasionally pressing against Thomas's leg when they approached a turn or doorway. In the kitchen, Thomas filled Rex's bowl with kibble, the sound of the food hitting the metal dish causing Rex's tail to thump against the floor. Thomas smiled. These small daily routines brought him comfort in a world that had changed so drastically for him. "You know what day it is, Rex?" "Tuesday, Park Day." Rex gave a soft woof in response, as if he understood every word. Perhaps he did. The bond between them went beyond ordinary pet and owner. Rex was more than just a service dog. He was Thomas's eyes, his protector, and his closest friend. What most people in the quiet neighborhood didn't realize was that Rex wasn't just any service dog. Before coming into Thomas's life, Rex had been Officer Rex, a highly trained police K-9 unit specializing in protection and suspect apprehension. When Rex reached 7 years of age, he was considered for retirement from active police duty. Around the same time, Thomas had returned home, adjusting to life without sight. A special program that paired retired police dogs with veterans in need had brought them together. The program director had seen something special in both Thomas and Rex, a perfect match of temperament and needs. Rex needed a purpose and Thomas needed independence. After breakfast, Thomas showered and dressed for the day. He chose his clothes by feel. Different textures and small tactile markers sewn into the tags helped him identify colors and styles. Today was a blue Henley shirt and jeans, casual and comfortable for their walk. "How do I look, Rex?" Thomas asked with a chuckle. Rex responded with a happy bark, which Thomas took as approval. Thomas clipped Rex's service vest into place. The vest was important. It signaled to others that Rex was working, not just a pet. It was navy blue with reflective strips and patches that read, "Service Dog" and "Do Not Pet." Thomas ran his fingers over the patches, a habit from when he could still see them. "Ready for work, aren't you?" Thomas said, noting how Rex's posture changed once the vest was on. The dog became more alert, more focused. It was like watching someone put on a uniform and transform into their professional self. Thomas understood that feeling well from his military days. At precisely 10 a.m., they left the house. Thomas locked the door behind them, then took hold of Rex's harness with his left hand. In his right, he carried a folding cane, though he rarely needed it with Rex by his side. "Forward," Thomas commanded softly, and they began their journey. The neighborhood came alive around them as they walked. Thomas could hear children playing in yards, the distant hum of a lawnmower, birds singing in the trees overhead. He'd learned to paint pictures in his mind using sound, smell, and the feel of the ground beneath his feet. Mrs. Chen from 2 doors down called out a greeting as they passed. "Good morning. Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Morning. Sure feels like it," Thomas replied with a wave in the direction of her voice. "Sun's warm today. You and that handsome dog enjoy your walk," she said. Thomas could hear the smile in her voice. As they continued down the sidewalk, Thomas felt Rex guiding him around obstacles. A garbage can left out, a bicycle propped against a tree. These were the small miracles of their partnership that Thomas never took for granted. They stopped at the corner store where the owner, Bill, always welcomed them. The bell above the door jingled as they entered. "There's my favorite customers," Bill called from behind the counter. The smell of fresh coffee and pastries filled the small space. "Morning, Bill," Thomas said, navigating to the counter with Rex's help. "Just the usual today." "1 coffee, black, and 1 dog biscuit from the special jar," Bill said, already preparing the order. "How's life treating you this week?" "Can't complain," Thomas replied. "Weather's good for our walks." While Bill prepared the coffee, Thomas reached into his pocket for his wallet. He identified bills by their fold patterns, a system he'd developed after losing his sight. "Here you go," Bill said, placing the coffee cup in Thomas's hand. "And 1 premium biscuit for the hardworking officer." Thomas smiled at that. Bill was one of the few people who knew Rex's background. Ex-officer, Thomas corrected gently. He's retired now, just like me. Once an officer, always an officer, Bill insisted. That training doesn't just disappear. Thomas nodded, knowing Bill was right. There had been moments when Rex's police training had shown through his service dog demeanor. A sudden alertness at unusual sounds. A protective stance when strangers approached too quickly. Coffee in hand, they continued their walk toward the park. It was a mile from Thomas's home, a distance that felt good to cover on foot. The exercise was important for both of them. As they walked, Thomas reflected on how his life had changed. Before the explosion that took his sight, he had been a communications specialist responsible for maintaining vital connections between units in the field. Now his most important connection was the one he shared with Rex. The sounds of traffic grew louder as they approached the main road leading to the park. Rex guided Thomas to the crosswalk and stopped, waiting for the signal to change. Thomas could hear the distinctive chirping sound that indicated it was safe for them to cross. "Forward," he commanded, and they stepped off the curb together. A car horn blared suddenly, someone impatient with the pedestrian crossing. Rex remained steady, undisturbed by the noise. Thomas patted the dog's back in appreciation of his calm demeanor. At the park entrance, Thomas could feel the change in the air, fresher, filled with the scent of grass and trees. The concrete beneath his feet gave way to a paved path that wound through the park's 50 acres. This was their favorite place in the whole town. "Let's find our bench," Thomas said. Rex guided him along the familiar route, past the playground where children's laughter rang out, past the small pond where ducks quacked hopefully at passers-by who might have breadcrumbs, and finally to a quiet bench beneath an old oak tree. Thomas sat down, patting the space beside him. "Up," he said, and Rex jumped up to sit next to him on the bench, a special privilege when they were resting. From his pocket, Thomas pulled out the biscuit from Bill's store. "You earned this," he said, holding it out for Rex, who took it gently from his fingers. As Rex enjoyed his treat, Thomas sipped his coffee and listened to the park around them. Tuesday mornings were usually quiet, with most people at work or school. That's why he preferred this time. Fewer crowds meant less complication for Rex to navigate. A jogger passed by, her footsteps rhythmic on the path. "Morning," she called out. "Good morning," Thomas replied, lifting his coffee cup in greeting. Life had found a peaceful routine. Mondays were for grocery shopping with the help of a local delivery service. Tuesdays and Thursdays were for long walks in the park. Wednesdays, Thomas volunteered at the Veterans Center, speaking with newly returned service members who were struggling with their own adjustments to civilian life. Fridays, he attended a support group for visually impaired veterans. Weekends were for home maintenance and occasional visits from his brother's family. It wasn't the life Thomas had imagined for himself, but it was a good life nonetheless. Rex had made it possible for him to maintain his independence, to continue contributing to his community, to find purpose beyond his loss. What Thomas didn't know as he sat peacefully on that bench was that his routine had been noticed. For the past few weeks, a group of bikers new to the area had been watching him and Rex during their regular park visits, and they had made plans that would soon disrupt the quiet life Thomas had carefully built for himself. But for now, on this sunny Tuesday morning, Thomas simply enjoyed the warmth on his face, the solid presence of Rex beside him, and the simple pleasure of a moment's rest in a favorite place. "You know what, Rex?" Thomas said quietly. "I think we're doing all right. You and me." Rex pressed his head against Thomas's arm in response, and in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The Red Dragon Bar sat on the edge of town, its neon sign flickering in the growing dusk. The gravel parking lot was filled with motorcycles, chrome gleaming under the setting sun. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of spilled beer. In the corner booth, away from the jukebox's blare, sat 4 men. They weren't locals, anyone could see that. They'd rolled into town 3 weeks ago, renting the rundown house at the end of Maple Street that nobody wanted because the roof leaked and the plumbing was questionable at best. Ray, the leader of the small group, took a long pull from his beer bottle before setting it down with a thud. "I'm telling you guys, it's perfect. Easy money." "I don't know, man," said Vince, the youngest of the 4, nervously picking at the label on his bottle. "Stealing from a blind guy? That's low, even for us." Ray leaned forward, his voice dropping. "We're not stealing from him. We're taking the dog. Big difference. Or how is that different?" Vince asked. Because, Ray explained with strained patience, that dog is worth serious cash. Did you see it? Pure German Shepherd, perfectly trained. Do you have any idea what people pay for dogs like that? The third man, Dale, nodded slowly. My cousin works with a guy who breeds them. Says the good ones go for thousands. Exactly, Ray said, pointing at Dale. Thousands. And this one's already trained. That blind guy probably got it for free from some charity program. The fourth man, Pete, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. What would we even do with it? It's not like we can just sell it at the local market. Ray grinned, revealing a gold tooth that caught the dim bar light. I got a contact in the next state over. Guy runs dogfights. He's always looking for big, strong dogs, or we sell it to one of those rich families in the hills who want a guard dog. Either way, quick cash. Vince shook his head. That dog helps that guy see, man. That's his eyes. He can get another one, Ray dismissed with a wave of his hand. Look, we need the money. The rent's due next week, and unless you've got a better idea for quick cash, this is the plan. The men fell silent, contemplating their drinks. They'd come to this town looking for a fresh start after things had gone south in their last location. A botched attempt to steal from a local store had put them on the police radar, forcing them to pack up and move quickly. They'd chosen this quiet town because it seemed like the kind of place where nothing ever happened, where they could lie low for a while. But money was running low, and opportunities were scarce. None of them had managed to find steady work, partly because they hadn't tried very hard, and partly because the town was small with limited jobs available. I've been watching them for 2 weeks now, Ray continued, sensing the hesitation in his companions. The blind guy and the dog follow the same routine. Tuesdays and Thursdays, they walk to the park around 10 in the morning. They sit on the same bench for about an hour, then head back home. Predictable as clockwork, Dale took a swig of his beer. So what's the plan? Just grab the dog and run? Ray shook his head. We do it smart. Thursday morning, we position ourselves along the path they take through the park. It's got that secluded stretch near the old oak trees where nobody really goes. That's where we make our move. And what about the blind guy? Pete asked. What if he puts up a fight? He won't, Ray said confidently. He's blind, for crying out loud. We tell him to hand over the dog, he does it, we're gone before he can even call for help. Simple. Vince still looked uncomfortable. I don't like it, Ray. Find something else for us to do. Ray's expression hardened. There is nothing else, Vince, unless you've got rent money I don't know about. Vince looked down at his beer, saying nothing. That's what I thought, Ray said. Look, I get it. It feels wrong. But we're not hurting anybody. The guy will be fine. He'll get another dog. Dale nodded slowly, coming around to the idea. It could work. Quick and clean. Exactly, Ray said, leaning back in his seat. We do it fast, we're in and out in minutes. By the time anyone even knows what happened, we'll be 2 towns over selling the dog. Pete drained the last of his beer. What if the dog doesn't cooperate? I mean, those service dogs are trained to stay with their owners, right? Ray reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small paper bag. From it, he produced a package of hot dogs. Dogs are still dogs. I've been testing this theory all week with strays. Wave one of these in their face, they forget all about their training. The others looked at the hot dogs skeptically. Trust me, Ray insisted. I've done my homework on this one. Outside the bar, the sun had fully set, casting the parking lot into darkness broken only by the neon bar sign and the occasional headlight from passing cars. Inside, the 4 men continued to plan, their voices low, their beers gradually emptying. As the night wore on, even Vince's objections faded. The promise of easy money was too tempting to resist, especially when the alternative was facing eviction. By closing time, they had their plan in place. Thursday morning, they would set their trap. What none of them realized, as they stumbled back to their rented house that night, was just how badly they had misjudged both the dog and its owner. The next morning, Ray woke earlier than the others. His head pounded from too many beers, but he forced himself up and out of the house. He wanted to do one final check of the park before Thursday. The autumn air was crisp as he walked the path, trying to look casual in his leather jacket and boots. He found the spot he'd selected, a curve in the path where thick bushes provided cover on one side and old oak trees on the other. It was perfect. Quiet, secluded with multiple escape routes. Ray checked his watch. If the blind man kept to his usual schedule, he should be coming along this path in about 20 minutes. Ray settled onto a bench nearby, pulling out his phone to look occupied. Sure enough, right on time, the blind man appeared on the path, the German shepherd guiding him with practiced ease. Ray watched them, studying the dog's movements, the way it constantly checked its surroundings while guiding its owner. There was something about the dog that made Ray pause. The way it moved was different from other dogs he'd seen, more alert, more purposeful. For a brief moment, he felt a flicker of doubt about their plan, but then he thought about the rent due, about the promises he'd made to the others, and his resolve hardened. As the blind man and dog passed his bench, Ray noticed something he hadn't seen before. The dog's vest had a small patch partially covered by a fold in the fabric. Ray squinted, trying to make out the letters. Canine something. Probably just identifying it as a canine service animal, he figured, dismissing the detail. Ray waited until they were well past before standing and taking the long way back to the house. He didn't want to risk the dog picking up his scent by following too closely. Back at the house, the others were awake, gathered around the small kitchen table nursing cups of coffee. All set for tomorrow, Ray announced as he entered. I checked the spot. It's perfect, Dale nodded. What time do we head out? 9:30, Ray said. We need to be in position before they arrive. Pete, you'll block the path from the front. I'll approach from behind. Dale, you come in from the left through the trees. Vince, you stay by the bikes as lookout. Vince looked relieved to be assigned the role furthest from the actual confrontation. Remember, Ray continued, quick and clean. We get the dog, we leave immediately. No hanging around, no causing a scene. The others nodded in agreement. The rest of Wednesday passed slowly. The men were restless, the anticipation of tomorrow's plan making them jumpy. They spent the evening checking and rechecking their motorcycles, making sure everything was in order for a quick getaway. As night fell, Ray sat on the porch alone, smoking a cigarette and watching the stars appear one by one. A part of him knew this plan crossed a line he hadn't crossed before. Stealing objects was one thing, stealing a service animal was another, but they needed the money, and this was the easiest opportunity he'd seen in months. Just a dog, he muttered to himself, flicking ash onto the worn porch boards. Just a dog. Thursday morning dawned clear and cool. The four men ate breakfast in silence, each lost in his own thoughts about the day ahead. At 9:15, they rolled their motorcycles out of the garage, starting them up with a roar that broke the morning quiet. They rode to the park, parking their bikes at the far entrance near the old playground that was rarely used. From there, they split up, each taking their assigned position. Ray crouched behind the thick bushes near the path bend, his heart beating faster than he'd expected. He checked his watch. 9:45. The blind man and his dog should be arriving any minute now. He patted his pocket, feeling the package of hot dogs he'd brought as bait. In his other pocket was a length of rope they'd use as a makeshift leash once they had the dog. Through the leaves, Ray could see Pete taking his position at the far end of the path curve. Dale was somewhere in the trees to the left, though Ray couldn't see him from his vantage point. Vince would be back with the bikes, keeping watch. At 9:52, Ray spotted them, the blind man walking confidently with his hand on the dog's harness, the German shepherd alert and focused on its job. They were approaching the curve in the path, right on schedule. Ray took a deep breath. This was it, the moment their plan would either succeed or fail. He gave the bird call signal they'd agreed upon, 2 short whistles that could pass for a cardinal if anyone else heard. As the blind man and dog reached the curve in the path, Pete stepped out in front of them, blocking their way. The dog stopped immediately, causing the blind man to halt as well. Excuse me, the blind man said, his head tilted slightly as if listening. Is someone there? Ray emerged from the bushes behind them, completing the trap. He could see Dale moving in from the trees now, the 3 of them forming a triangle around their targets. Nice dog you got there, Ray said, his voice falsely friendly. Real nice dog. The blind man turned his head toward Ray's voice, his expression cautious but not yet alarmed. Thank you. Now if you'll excuse us, we need to continue our walk. About that, Ray said, stepping closer. We're going to need you to hand over the dog. The blind man's grip tightened on the harness. I'm afraid that's not possible. Please let us pass. Ray exchanged glances with Pete and Dale, who were closing in from their positions. The dog, meanwhile, had gone completely still, its ears forward, its posture suddenly different from the calm service animal it had been moments before. And in that moment, just before everything went wrong, Ray noticed the patch on the dog's vest that had been partially hidden before. Now fully visible, it read, K9 Unit, Retired. A chill ran down Ray's spine as the realization dawned on him. They hadn't just targeted any service dog. They'd targeted a police dog. And by the look in the German Shepherd's eyes as it stared directly at him, it hadn't forgotten its training one bit. The air in the park seemed to freeze as Thomas stood surrounded by the three men. He couldn't see them, but he could sense their positions from their voices and the subtle shifts in Rex's posture beneath his hand. "Look, buddy," the voice behind him said, taking on a harder edge. "We don't want trouble. Just hand over the dog and you can be on your way." Thomas took a slow, deep breath. In his years of darkness, he'd developed other senses. The ability to read a situation through sound, through feeling, through the countless subtle cues that most people overlooked. Right now, everything told him this was dangerous. "This dog is my service animal," Thomas said calmly, his military training kicking in. Stay calm in crisis that had been drilled into him years ago. He's protected by law. Interfering with a service animal is a federal offense. A different voice snorted from his left. "Yeah? Well, we're not too worried about the law right now." Thomas could feel Rex's muscles tensing under his hand. The dog was still in service mode, not making a sound. But Thomas knew every twitch, every shift in Rex's body language. The dog was on high alert. "You've got 10 seconds to unclip that harness," said the first voice, now directly behind Thomas. "Or we take it from you." "I strongly advise against that," Thomas replied, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "For your own safety." There was a pause, then a burst of laughter from the men. "Our safety?" The voice to his front mocked. "That's rich coming from a blind guy surrounded by three of us." Thomas didn't correct them. Let them think it was just the three of them against one blind man. Let them underestimate him. More importantly, let them underestimate Rex. Last chance, the voice behind him growled. Thomas heard the crunch of gravel as the man stepped closer. "Give us the dog." Thomas squared his shoulders. "No." He felt movement behind him, fast and aggressive. Then came the sound he'd been waiting for. A low, deep growl from Rex's throat. It was a sound Thomas had heard only twice before, both times when Rex had sensed real danger. "Whoa. Call off your dog, man!" The voice behind him had jumped back, the bravado suddenly replaced with uncertainty. "Rex is currently the only thing keeping you safe," Thomas said quietly. "He's still in service mode, still following his training. If you walk away now, that won't change." "Listen to this guy," said the voice to his left with a nervous laugh, thinking his pet can take on 3 grown men. Thomas felt a slight smile touch his lips. "Rex isn't a pet." There was a moment of silence as the men seemed to consider their options. Thomas could hear their breathing, the shifting of their feet, the subtle sounds of indecision. Then came the sound of something hitting the ground near them, the soft thud of a small object landing on the path. Thomas couldn't see what it was, but he could smell it. Processed meat, probably a hot dog or sausage. "Here, boy," coaxed the voice in front of him. "Look what I've got for you." "Come on, good dog." Rex didn't move a muscle. His training to ignore food from strangers was absolute. "What's wrong with your dog?" the voice asked, confusion evident in his tone. "Dogs love this stuff." "As I said," Thomas replied patiently, "Rex isn't a pet." The tension in the air shifted. Thomas could feel their frustration building, their plan falling apart. That made them dangerous. Cornered men often made rash decisions. "Enough of this," snapped the voice behind him. Thomas heard the distinctive sound of a switchblade opening. "Grab the blind guy. I'll take care of the dog." Everything happened at once. A hand grabbed Thomas's arm roughly, trying to pull him away from Rex. At the same moment, Thomas gave the command he'd hoped he wouldn't have to use. "Rex, protect." The change in Rex was instant and dramatic. The calm service dog transformed in a heartbeat, his police K9 training taking over. The low growl became a snarl that would make anyone's blood run cold. Thomas felt Rex's weight shift as the dog moved into a defensive stance. "What the?" The voice in front of him cut off in shock. Thomas heard a scuffle, a yelp of pain and the sound of someone hitting the ground hard. The hand on his arm suddenly released as the man behind him backed away quickly. "Call him off," shouted the voice now on the ground. "Call him off." "Rex, hold," Thomas commanded firmly. The snarling stopped, but Thomas knew Rex would be standing over the fallen man, teeth bared, ready to act if the threat continued. "What kind of service dog is this?" gasped the man on the ground. Rex is a retired police K-9 unit, Thomas explained calmly. Trained in suspect apprehension and handler protection before he became my service animal. Right now he's doing exactly what he was trained to do. There was a stunned silence as this information sank in. You tried to steal a police dog? The voice to Thomas's left sounded incredulous, addressing his companions rather than Thomas. How was I supposed to know? Hissed the voice from the ground. He's with a blind guy. That's the program, Thomas explained. Retired K-9s paired with veterans who need service animals. Works out well for everyone. Well, everyone except people who try to steal them. Thomas heard movement to his left. The third man backing away slowly. Ray, this is messed up. I'm out. Don't you dare leave, Dale, shouted the man on the ground, Ray apparently. Get this dog off me. I wouldn't advise trying to help your friend, Thomas said to the retreating man. Rex is trained to perceive that as a threat. Right now, he's in control mode, not attack mode. Let's keep it that way. The park had gone strangely quiet. Thomas realized that other morning visitors must have seen the confrontation and either left hurriedly or were watching from a safe distance. Hopefully someone had called for help. Listen, Thomas said, addressing all three men. This can end one of two ways. You can wait here quietly until the police arrive, or you can make this situation much worse for yourselves by continuing to resist. Police? The panic in Ray's voice was evident. No one's called the cops yet. Let me up and we'll just walk away. No harm done, Thomas smiled grimly. Rex began transmitting the moment I gave the protect command. What? Transmitting what? Ray sounded confused. His vest, Thomas explained. It's equipped with a panic button and GPS tracker linked directly to the local police station. Standard for retired K-9s in the service animal program. The police have been alerted and are on their way. They know exactly where we are. This was, in fact, a lie. Rex's vest had no such technology. But Thomas had learned long ago that confidence could be as effective as truth in controlling a situation. He was gambling that these men wouldn't call his bluff. The gamble paid off. He heard muttered curses and the sound of the third man, Dale, moving further away. Don't leave. Ray shouted again. He's bluffing. Am I? Thomas asked calmly. Are you really willing to bet on that? Because in about 2 minutes, this park will be full of officers who won't be happy that someone tried to steal one of their retired partners. The tension was broken by the distant sound of sirens. Thomas felt a wave of relief wash over him. Someone had indeed called the police, see? Thomas said. Right on schedule. This is garbage. Ray spat from his position on the ground. It's just a dog. Thomas shook his head. No, he's not just a dog. And you're not just a thief. You're a thief who targeted a disabled veteran. That's not going to play well in court. The sirens were getting louder, clearly heading toward the park. Thomas heard rapid footsteps as Dale apparently decided to make a run for it. Rex, stay, Thomas commanded, making sure his dog remained focused on the immediate threat, the man on the ground. The cops are coming for real? Asked the man who had been in front of Thomas, his voice now small with fear. Yes, Thomas confirmed. Your best option now is to cooperate. Running will only make things worse. The sound of cars pulling up at the park entrance reached them, followed by doors slamming and voices calling out. The cavalry had arrived. Police! Stay where you are! A commanding voice shouted from the direction of the park entrance. Over here, Thomas called back. By the oak trees. Footsteps pounded toward them. Multiple officers by the sound of it. Thomas heard gasps and exclamations as they took in the scene. A blind man standing calmly beside his German shepherd, which had a man pinned to the ground while another man stood frozen in indecision nearby. Thomas, are you all right? Called a familiar voice. Thomas felt a smile spread across his face as he recognized Officer Wilson, one of the regular patrol officers who often stopped to chat with him during his walks. I'm fine, Officer Wilson, Thomas replied. Thanks to Rex. Rex, is that K-9 Rex? Officer Wilson's voice was filled with surprise. The very same, Thomas confirmed. Apparently these gentlemen didn't notice the retired K-9 patch on his vest before they decided to try and take him from me. There was a moment of silence. Then Officer Wilson burst into laughter. You have got to be kidding me. They tried to steal Rex. Former top K-9 in the department, Rex. That's right, Thomas said, finally allowing himself to relax slightly. I don't think they knew what they were getting into. More officers had arrived, surrounding them completely now. Thomas heard the click of handcuffs as the two remaining men were secured. Rex, release, Thomas commanded. The dog immediately backed away from Ray, returning to Thomas's side and pressing against his leg reassuringly. Good boy, Thomas murmured, finding Rex's head and scratching behind his ears. Very good boy. Thomas, we'll need to get a statement from you, Officer Wilson said, his voice becoming professional again. Can I help you to one of the patrol cars? Of course, Thomas agreed, taking hold of Rex's harness again. Rex, forward. As they walked toward the park entrance, Thomas heard one of the officers reading the men their rights. Another officer approached, walking beside them. Sir, the officer said respectfully, I just want to say, that's one incredible dog you have there. He is, Thomas agreed, feeling a surge of pride and gratitude. Best partner I could ask for. I've heard stories about Rex from some of the older officers, the young officer continued. They say he had the highest apprehension success rate in the department's history, Thomas nodded. That's what they told me when we were paired. He had an impressive career before retiring to service work. They reached the patrol car, and Officer Wilson helped Thomas into the back seat, making sure he was comfortable before closing the door. Rex settled at Thomas's feet, his body still alert but calmer now that they were safe. Through the open window, Thomas could hear the officers talking as they processed the scene. He caught fragments of conversation. Apparently, the third man, Dale, had been caught trying to flee on a motorcycle. They'd found a fourth man as well, presumably the lookout for the operation. Thomas leaned his head back against the seat, suddenly feeling the adrenaline drain from his body, leaving him shaky and tired. He reached down to touch Rex, drawing comfort from the solid warmth of his companion. We did good, buddy, he whispered. We did good. Rex pressed his head into Thomas's hand, as if to say he agreed. The park was now filled with police activity, officers taking statements from witnesses, securing the area, processing the would-be dog thieves. What had started as a routine morning walk had turned into something much more dramatic. Thomas closed his eyes, not to shut out the world, that had happened years ago, but to center himself to process what had just occurred. In his darkness, he found clarity. He and Rex had faced danger together and overcome it. Their partnership, their bond, had been tested and proven strong. There would be questions to answer, statements to give, perhaps even court appearances in the future. But right now, in this moment, Thomas felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for Rex, for the program that had brought them together, for the training that had prepared them both for moments like this. Most of all, gratitude for the second chance he'd been given after losing his sight, the chance to live independently, to continue being useful, to forge this extraordinary connection with an extraordinary animal. Sir, Officer Wilson's voice broke into his thoughts. We're ready to take your statement now if you're up to it. Thomas opened his eyes, facing the darkness that had become his constant companion. Yes, I'm ready, he said, his hand still resting on Rex's head. We both are. Ray knew he had made a terrible mistake the moment he saw the dog's posture change. 1 second, the German Shepherd had been a calm service animal, guiding its blind owner through the park. The next, it had transformed into something else entirely, alert, focused, and unmistakably dangerous. What's happening? Pete called from his position blocking the path, clearly noticing the change as well. The blind man stood perfectly still, his hand steady on the dog's harness. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but carried an undercurrent of steel that hadn't been there before. This is your final warning, he said. Walk away now. Ray hesitated, his confidence wavering. This wasn't going according to plan. The dog should have been easy to lure away. The blind man should have been helpless without his guide. Instead, both were standing their ground, showing no fear despite being outnumbered. We're not leaving without the dog, Ray insisted, trying to sound more confident than he felt. He reached slowly into his pocket for the switchblade, hoping the movement wouldn't be noticed. The blind man tilted his head slightly, as if listening intently. You're reaching for a weapon, he stated matter-of-factly. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Ray froze, startled by the blind man's perception. How could he possibly know that? Rex, the blind man said quietly. Alert. The dog's ears perked forward, its gaze locked on Ray. A low, rumbling growl emerged from deep in the animal's chest. Not loud, but filled with unmistakable warning. Dale shifted nervously from his position among the trees. Ray, maybe we should— Shut up, Ray snapped, his eyes never leaving the dog. He had come too far to back down now. The rent was due and they needed the money. Besides, it was still just a dog, trained or not. Ray took a step forward, blade now in hand but still closed. "Last chance," he growled at the blind man. "Hand over the dog or things get ugly." The blind man sighed, almost as if disappointed. "Rex," he said calmly. "Protect." What happened next occurred so quickly that Ray would later have trouble describing it to the others. The German Shepherd's demeanor changed instantly, service animal to working canine in the blink of an eye. The dog pivoted with military precision, placing itself directly between its owner and Ray. The growl deepened, teeth now visible, white and sharp against the black muzzle. This wasn't the behavior of a pet or even a typical service animal. This was something else entirely. Calculated, controlled aggression with clear purpose. Ray took an involuntary step backward, suddenly understanding the meaning of the patch he'd noticed earlier. K9 unit retired didn't mean the dog was an old pet. It meant this animal had been a police officer and clearly remembered its training. "Call it off," Ray said, his voice cracking slightly. "Call off your dog." "Rex is doing exactly what he's trained to do," the blind man replied, protecting his handler from a threat. "Are you a threat, sir?" Pete began inching backward, clearly reconsidering his role in this situation. "Ray, this isn't right. That's a police dog." "Former police dog," the blind man corrected. "Now a service animal. But as you're discovering, some training never goes away." Ray gripped the switchblade tighter, anger replacing his momentary fear. No one made a fool of him, especially not some blind guy and his dog. He flicked the blade open with a distinctive click. The sound was all it took. Rex launched forward with explosive power, covering the short distance between them in a single bound. Before Ray could react, the dog had clamped down on his wrist, not with full bite force, but with precisely the right pressure to cause pain without serious injury. Ray screamed, dropping the knife instantly. He tried to pull away, but the dog held firm, its grip secure but controlled. "Rex, hold," the blind man commanded, and the dog froze in position, neither increasing nor decreasing pressure. Dale and Pete stood frozen in shock, watching as their leader was effectively immobilized by the dog. "This," the blind man said calmly, "is what's called a control hold in police K9 training. Rex could easily break the bones in your wrist if he applied full pressure. Right now, he's using about 30% of his bite force, just enough to restrain you without causing permanent damage." Ray whimpered, his bravado completely gone. "Get it off me," he pleaded. "Please." "First, your friends will back away," the blind man instructed. "All the way to the main path. They will not run and they will not approach us. Then and only then will I instruct Rex to release you." Pete immediately began backing away, hands raised in surrender. I'm going," he said quickly. "Dale, come on." Dale hesitated only briefly before following Pete's lead. Together, they retreated to the main path as instructed, keeping their movements slow and deliberate. With his free hand, the blind man reached into his pocket and pulled out a cell phone. Using voice commands, he placed a call to emergency services, calmly reporting an attempted robbery and assault in the park. "Yes, my service dog has one of them restrained," he explained to the dispatcher. Former police K9. The other two are standing about 15 feet away. "No, I'm not in immediate danger. Yes, we'll stay put until officers arrive." After ending the call, the blind man addressed Ray again. "The police are on their way. They should be here in about 5 minutes. Until then, I suggest you remain very still. Rex takes his job seriously." Ray stood awkwardly, trying not to move his arm in the dog's grip. The pain was intense but bearable as long as he didn't struggle. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "You're making a mistake," Ray tried, his voice strained. "We weren't really going to hurt anyone. Just wanted to scare you a bit, that's all." The blind man's expression didn't change. The switchblade in your hand suggested otherwise. "It was just for show," Ray insisted. "Come on, man. Call off your dog. We'll leave town, never bother you again." "That's not my decision anymore," the blind man replied. "You brought weapons to threaten a disabled person. That's for the police to handle now." From the main path, Pete called out hesitantly, "Can we just go? We didn't do anything yet." "Conspiracy to commit robbery," the blind man answered. "Attempted theft of a service animal, which is a federal offense. Threatening a disabled person with a weapon. The list goes on. I suggest you stay put and avoid adding fleeing the scene of a crime to that list." Pete and Dale exchanged glances but remained where they were. Minutes that felt like hours passed in tense silence. Ray's arm had gone from painful to numb where Rex held it, the dog maintaining the exact same pressure without showing any signs of tiring or losing focus. Finally, the sound of sirens pierced the morning quiet, growing louder as police vehicles approached the park. "Hear that?" the blind man said. "Help is coming. Now Rex is going to release you, but he'll still be watching you. Any sudden movements, any attempt to flee, and he'll respond accordingly. Do you understand?" Ray nodded miserably, then realized his mistake. "Yes," he said aloud. "I understand. Rex, release," the blind man commanded. The dog immediately let go of Ray's wrist but remained positioned between him and its owner, alert and ready to respond if needed. Ray cradled his arm against his chest, feeling returning in painful tingles. The skin wasn't broken. Somehow the dog had applied enough pressure to control without puncturing. But he'd have an impressive bruise. Police officers appeared on the path, approaching quickly with hands on their weapons. Taking in the scene, they immediately focused on the three men, recognizing the situation for what it was. As the officers secured Ray, Pete, and Dale, one approached the blind man with familiarity. "Thomas," the officer said, "are you all right?" The blind man, Thomas, nodded. "I'm fine, Officer Garcia. Thanks to Rex here." Officer Garcia knelt down to the dog's level, a smile spreading across his face. "Rex, I didn't recognize you with the service vest." "How's retirement treating you, old partner?" To Ray's astonishment, the dog's demeanor changed completely at the officer's voice. The alert, protective stance softened, and the dog's tail began to wag as it moved forward to greet the officer. "Wait," Ray said, looking between the officer and the dog. "You know this dog?" Officer Garcia glanced up, his expression hardening as he looked at Ray. "Know him? I was his handler for 5 years before his retirement. Rex was the best K-9 officer this department ever had. Over 100 successful apprehensions, 3 officers' lives saved, and more awards than any other K-9 in department history." Ray felt the blood drain from his face as the full magnitude of his mistake became clear. "You tried to steal a police legend," Officer Garcia continued, scratching Rex behind the ears. "Not just any service dog, but a decorated officer with more experience taking down criminals than most of the human officers on the force." Another officer approached, handcuffs ready. "You're under arrest," she informed Ray, reciting his rights as she secured his hands behind his back. As Ray was led away to a waiting police car, he looked back at Thomas and Rex. The blind veteran stood tall, one hand resting lightly on his dog's head. Despite everything, there was no anger in his face, just a quiet dignity that made Ray feel even smaller. The realization hit Ray like a physical blow. He hadn't targeted a helpless victim at all. He'd challenged a team, a veteran and his K-9 partner who were far more capable than Ray had ever been, even at his best. In the police car, as the door closed on his failed scheme, Ray had time to reflect on the irony. He'd thought stealing from a blind man would be easy. Instead, his own blindness to the reality of who he was targeting had led to his downfall. Back in the park, Thomas knelt beside Rex, running his hands over the dog's body to check for any injuries. "Is he okay?" Officer Garcia asked. "He's fine," Thomas confirmed, not even breathing hard. For Rex, this was just another day at the office. Officer Garcia laughed. "Same old Rex, always professional." He paused, growing serious. "You know, when the department agreed to place him with you through the Veteran Service Dog program, some people were worried. Wondered if a dog with his training would adapt to service work?" Thomas smiled, standing up again with his hand on Rex's harness. "He adapted perfectly. Gets to be a guide dog most days, and occasionally he gets to remember his old job. Best of both worlds." "Well, the chief will want to hear about this," Officer Garcia said. "Rex might be retired, but he's still part of the police family. Taking down bad guys even in retirement, that's going to make quite a story at the next department meeting." As they walked together toward the park entrance, other officers stopped what they were doing to greet Rex, many recognizing their former colleague despite the service vest that had replaced his police harness. For Thomas, the attention was nothing new. He'd grown accustomed to people being drawn to Rex, to hearing stories about his dog's legendary career. What still amazed him, even after their years together, was how seamlessly Rex moved between his two roles, gentle guide and fierce protector. "You know," Thomas said to Officer Garcia as they reached the park entrance, When they first paired us, the trainer told me something I've never forgotten. He said that Rex wouldn't just be my eyes, he'd be my shield too. Today proved just how right that was. Officer Garcia nodded. That's Rex for you. Always going above and beyond the call of duty. Thomas felt Rex press against his leg. A familiar reassurance that all was well. The morning's danger had passed, transformed now into just another story in their shared journey. The blind veteran and his extraordinary dog, each making the other whole in ways that went far beyond simple service. What neither of them could know, as they left the park surrounded by officers, was that their story was just beginning to spread. By nightfall, word of what had happened would reach far beyond their small town, touching lives they had never met and setting in motion changes they could not yet imagine. For now, though, it was enough that they were safe, that justice would be served, and that their partnership had once again proven its strength. Thomas reached down to pat Rex's head, finding comfort in the solid presence that had become his anchor in a world of darkness. "Come on, boy," he said softly. "Let's go home." The small-town courthouse stood solid and dignified against the bright blue October sky. Its red brick walls and white columns had witnessed decades of the community's triumphs and troubles, its justice and injustice. Today it would host one more chapter in the ongoing story of right and wrong. Thomas sat on a bench outside the courtroom, Rex lying at his feet. The dog was wearing his formal service vest, the one Thomas saved for special occasions. Though Thomas couldn't see it, he knew the vest looked sharp. Navy blue with reflective piping and patches identifying Rex as both a service animal and a retired K-9 officer. "Nervous?" asked Officer Garcia, sitting down beside Thomas. Thomas smiled slightly. "Not really. Just ready for this to be over." It had been 3 weeks since the incident in the park. 3 weeks of giving statements, talking to prosecutors, preparing for this day. The story had spread through the town like wildfire. The blind veteran and his retired police dog foiling an attempted robbery. Local papers had run the story on their front pages. The regional news had picked it up next, then a few national outlets looking for an uplifting human interest piece. Suddenly, Thomas and Rex were minor celebrities. People stopped them on their daily walks to offer congratulations or ask for the story firsthand. The attention was uncomfortable for Thomas, who had always preferred a quiet life. But he understood why the story resonated with people. Everyone loved an underdog tale, even when the underdog turned out to be anything but. "The prosecutor says it should be pretty straightforward," Officer Garcia continued. All 4 of them took the plea deal. "No need for a full trial," Thomas nodded. The 4 bikers, Ray, Pete, Dale, and their lookout Vince, had been charged with multiple offenses: attempted theft of a service animal, threatening a disabled person, possession of a weapon during the commission of a crime, and conspiracy. Facing years in prison, they'd all agreed to plea bargains that would reduce their sentences in exchange for guilty pleas. Today was the sentencing hearing. Thomas would have the opportunity to make a victim impact statement if he chose to. He'd been thinking about what to say for days. The courthouse door opened, and Thomas heard the tap of familiar footsteps approaching. "Mr. Brown?" It was Ms. Patel, the district attorney handling the case. "They're ready for us now." Thomas stood, taking hold of Rex's harness. "Ready," he said. They entered the courtroom, the atmosphere immediately shifting to one of formal solemnity. Thomas could hear the rustle of people standing as they entered, the whispers quickly hushed by the bailiff. Ms. Patel guided him to the appropriate table, describing the layout of the room so he could orient himself. The judge's bench is directly ahead. The defendants are seated at the table to your right with their attorney. There's quite a crowd in the gallery behind us. Seems like half the town showed up. Thomas nodded his thanks for the description. Rex settled at his feet, perfectly behaved as always in public settings. "All rise," called the bailiff. The Honorable Judge Eleanor Williams presiding. The rustle of movement filled the room as everyone stood. Thomas heard the door behind the bench open and the sound of the judge taking her seat. "Be seated," Judge Williams said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Court is now in session. We're here for the sentencing in the case of the state versus Raymond Mercer, Peter Collins, Dale Winters, and Vincent Taylor." The proceedings began with the formal reading of charges and confirmation of the guilty pleas. Thomas listened attentively, his hand occasionally dropping to touch Rex's head for reassurance. When it came time for the defendants to speak, each offered brief, rehearsed-sounding apologies. Ray, identified as the ringleader, spoke last. "I want to apologize to Mr. Brown," he said, his voice lacking the arrogance Thomas remembered from the park. "What we did was wrong. We didn't think about how important that dog was to him. Not just as a pet, but as his eyes. I'm sorry." Thomas noted what was missing from the apology. Any acknowledgement that they had targeted him precisely because they thought his disability made him vulnerable. But he said nothing, waiting for his own turn to speak. "Mr. Brown," Judge Williams said, "as the victim in this case, you have the right to make a statement before sentencing. Would you like to address the court?" Thomas stood, feeling all eyes in the room upon him. Rex remained seated but alert at his side. "Yes, Your Honor, thank you." Thomas took a moment to gather his thoughts. He hadn't written anything down, preferring to speak from the heart. 3 years ago, he began, I was in a very dark place, not just because I'd lost my sight in Afghanistan, but because I'd lost my purpose, my identity. I didn't know who I was anymore if I wasn't a soldier. I couldn't see a future for myself. The courtroom was completely silent, everyone hanging on his words. Then I was introduced to a program that paired retired police K-9s with veterans who needed service animals. That's how Rex came into my life. From the first day, he was more than just a guide dog. He was a fellow veteran in his own way, someone who understood service and sacrifice. Thomas reached down to touch Rex's head before continuing. When these men surrounded us in the park that day, they didn't see us for who we really are. They saw what they thought was weakness. A blind man who couldn't defend himself, who would be easy to intimidate. They saw a dog they could steal and sell for quick cash. They didn't see two trained professionals who had each other's backs. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the courtroom. I'm not standing here today, asking for harsh punishment out of anger or a desire for revenge. I'm here because I believe in consequences and in the possibility of change. These men made choices based on seeing only weakness where there was strength, only vulnerability where there was capability. Their mistake wasn't just a legal one, it was a failure to see beyond the surface. Thomas paused, turning slightly toward where he knew the defendants were sitting. My hope is that whatever sentence they receive helps them learn to look deeper, at others and at themselves. To see value in people they might have dismissed. To find better choices than taking advantage of those they perceive as weak. Thomas turned back toward the judge. Your Honor, Rex and I have moved forward from that day in the park. We continue our walks, our routines, our life together. We're not defined by being victims, just as I'm not defined solely by my blindness or Rex by his role as a service animal. Whatever punishment the court decides is appropriate. I hope it includes opportunities for education and rehabilitation, not just because it might help these men, but because it might help others they encounter in the future. Thomas nodded slightly to indicate he had finished, then sat down. Rex pressed against his leg in silent support. Thank you, Mr. Brown, Judge Williams said, and Thomas could hear the genuine respect in her voice. Your perspective is both valuable and admirable. After a brief recess to consider the statements and recommendations, Judge Williams returned to deliver her sentences. Ray, as the instigator who had also pulled a weapon, received the harshest penalty. 18 months in prison followed by 3 years of probation. The others received shorter jail terms of 6 to 12 months, all with probation to follow. All 4 were ordered to complete community service, specifically working with organizations serving people with disabilities, and to attend education programs about service animals and their importance. As the defendants were led away, Judge Williams had one final comment. Mr. Brown, she said, I want to thank you for your service to this country, both in uniform and now as an example of resilience and compassion, and please extend my regards to your partner Rex. It seems this community is fortunate to have both of you as citizens. Thomas smiled and nodded his appreciation. Thank you, Your Honor. As the courtroom began to clear, Officer Garcia approached. That was quite a statement, Thomas. Very generous considering what they tried to do. Thomas shrugged. Holding on to anger doesn't help me move forward. Besides, Rex and I handled ourselves pretty well that day. Hard to stay mad when things worked out in our favor. Officer Garcia laughed. That's one way of looking at it. Listen, there are some people outside who'd like to talk to you if you're up for it. People? Thomas asked, curious. News reporters, for one. Your story has really caught people's attention. But also Captain Rodriguez from the K-9 unit. and some folks from the Veterans Affairs Office. Something about wanting to discuss expanding the program that matched you with Rex. Thomas raised his eyebrows in surprise. Expanding the program? That's unexpected. Apparently your story highlighted a need, Officer Garcia explained. There are more retired canines than there are police handlers who can adopt them, and more veterans who could benefit from service animals than current programs can support. Seems like you and Rex might have accidentally created an opportunity. Thomas felt a mix of emotions, surprise, pride, and a sense of coming full circle. What had begun as a frightening encounter in the park might end up helping other veterans find their own Rex, their own second chance. I'd be happy to talk with them, Thomas said, standing and taking hold of Rex's harness. Lead the way. Outside the courthouse, the autumn air was crisp and filled with possibility. Thomas could hear the murmur of a waiting crowd, the click of cameras, the occasional bark of a police canine brought by officers who had come to show support. As Officer Garcia guided them toward the gathered people, a spontaneous round of applause broke out. Rex, ever the professional, remained steady at Thomas's side, guiding him safely through what could have been an overwhelming situation. Captain Rodriguez was the first to greet them. Mr. Brown, it's an honor to meet you. And to see Rex again, of course. He was one of our finest. The honor is mine, Thomas replied, extending his hand. Rex has given me back my independence. I can never fully repay that. Actually, Captain Rodriguez said, that's what we wanted to discuss with you. The department has received inquiries from several other police agencies about our retired canine placement program. Until now, it's been very small, just 3 or 4 dogs placed with veterans in the past few years. But after your story made the news, interest has exploded. Thomas listened as Captain Rodriguez explained the potential expansion. More funding, more dogs, more veterans helped. The VA representatives added details about therapeutic benefits they documented in veterans paired with service animals, particularly those with PTSD or physical disabilities. We're hoping you might be willing to help us, Captain Rodriguez concluded. Your experience, both the success of your partnership with Rex and the way you handled the incident in the park, makes you the perfect ambassador for the program. Thomas was momentarily speechless. When he'd first lost his sight, he'd wondered if he would ever be useful again, if he had anything left to contribute. Now here was an opportunity to help other veterans find what he had found with Rex. Not just assistance, but partnership. Purpose. I'd be honored, Thomas said finally. Rex and I both would. The conversation continued, plans taking shape for presentations to potential donors, visits to police canine training facilities, discussions with veterans groups. What had begun as a simple sentencing hearing was transforming into something much larger. A new chapter not just for Thomas and Rex, but potentially for many others like them. As the impromptu meeting wound down, a young reporter approached, recorder in hand. Mr. Brown, could I ask you one question for our viewers? She asked. Many people see your story as remarkable because you and Rex overcame what appeared to be a disadvantage. How do you respond to that? Thomas considered the question carefully. Rex sat perfectly still beside him, the very picture of attentive service. I would say that appearances can be deceiving, Thomas replied. Those men in the park saw what they expected to see, a disability, a vulnerability. They didn't look deeper. If there's a lesson in our story, maybe it's that we should all look beyond the surface, beyond our first assumptions about others and about ourselves. The reporter thanked him, clearly pleased with the quotable response. As Thomas and Rex finally made their way home, accompanied by Officer Garcia who had offered them a ride, Thomas reflected on the strange path that had led them here. A chance encounter in a park had rippled outward, touching more lives than he could have imagined. You know, Officer Garcia said as they drove, when Rex was first paired with you, some of us worried it might be hard for him to adjust, going from active police work to service animal duties. But seeing you two together, it's clear he's exactly where he's supposed to be. Thomas smiled, his hand resting on Rex's head in the back seat. I think we both are, he said quietly. Sometimes the right partnership makes all the difference. At home, Thomas removed Rex's formal vest, replacing it with the more comfortable everyday one. They settled into their evening routine, dinner, a short walk around the neighborhood, then relaxing together in the living room. As Thomas sat in his favorite armchair, Rex lying contentedly at his feet, He thought about the future that was opening up before them. The program expansion. The other veterans and retired K-9s who might find in each other what he and Rex had found. A new purpose. A second chapter. A perfect partnership. We did good. Buddy, Thomas murmured, reaching down to scratch behind Rex's ears. We did real good. Rex's tail thumped against the floor in agreement, a sound that to Thomas had come to mean home and safety and possibility. In the darkness that had become his constant companion, Thomas had found an unexpected light, a path forward. Guided by 4 paws and an unbreakable bond, outside, the town was settling into evening, unaware that within its quiet streets, a small miracle of connection had occurred, one that would soon be replicated in other towns with other veterans, with other dogs eager for new purpose. It had all started with a mistake. Bikers who tried to steal what they thought was just a dog, unaware it was a police K-9 unit. It would end with countless new beginnings for those who, like Thomas and Rex, had more to give than the world might initially see.